Working the night shift at a gas station isn't exactly what I'd call exciting, but it pays the bills and keeps me out of trouble. The place is a relic, tucked off a forgotten highway that used to be bustling decades ago. Now it's just me, the endless dark, and a single row of pumps, their faded paint peeling under the fluorescent lights. Most of the pumps are as old as the station itself, but there's one that stands out. Pump number 3. It's not like the others. The metal gleams unnaturally, as if it's been polished by invisible hands, and the numbers on the meter don't quite match modern prices. The thing is practically an antique, yet it works flawlessly, humming softly like it's alive. I've always thought it was strange that only certain cars ever pulled up to it, not just old cars, ancient ones. We're talking Packards, Studebakers, and DeSotos, the kind you'd see in black and white photos. At first I figured it was just a coincidence. There are a few car collectors in the area, and maybe they like the aesthetic of fueling up at a station that looks like it's stuck in the 1950s. But then I started noticing something off. The cars were too perfect. No rust, no dents, no mismatched paint. They purred like new, their engines too smooth for vehicles that should have been sitting in a scrapyard decades ago. And the drivers, well, they weren't much different. Last week, an older man in a wide-brimmed hat rolled up in a 1939 Cadillac. He looked like he'd walked straight out of a classic movie-tailored suit, polished shoes, and a pocket watch that glinted when he checked the time. He didn't say much, just nodded politely and paid in crisp old bills that smelled faintly of mothballs. When I rang him up, I couldn't help but ask, "Nice car. You restore it yourself?" He paused, his hand lingering over the counter as he slid the bills across. "It's always been in good shape," he said, his voice low and distant, like he wasn't really talking to me. Before I could respond, he tipped his hat and walked out. That was weird enough, but what happened tonight, that's something I can't explain. It started like any other shift. The highway was empty, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the occasional buzz of a cicada outside. Around 2 a.m., I was stocking the shelves when I heard the unmistakable crunch of tires on gravel. I glanced out the window and saw a sleek black car rolling up to pump number 3. It was a Buick, maybe late 1940s if I had to guess. The headlights cut through the darkness like knives, but the inside of the car was pitch black, no driver. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I squinted, leaning closer to the window, but there was no one in the car. The engine idled smoothly, the kind of low, purring rumble you'd hear in an old gangster flick. I waited, expecting someone to step out, but the door stayed shut. Against my better judgment, I stepped outside. The air was colder than usual, sharp and biting against my skin. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty lot. The car didn't move, but the pump started on its own. The numbers on the meter spun wildly, faster than I'd ever seen, as if it were fueling up something far hungrier than a gas tank. The smell of gasoline filled the air, thick and choking, but I couldn't move. And then I saw it, the shadow. It stretched across the lot, long and jagged, creeping toward me like a living thing. It didn't belong to the car or anything else I could see. It just kept coming, swallowing the light as it went. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and when I looked up again, the car was gone. The pump clicked off, the meter reset to 0, and the night was silent once more. I should have gone back inside, locked the door, and called it a night. But something on the ground caught my eye. A coin. No, not just a coin. A silver dollar shining like it had just been minted. I picked it up, my hand trembling. The date read 1929. The air around me felt heavier, colder, and then I heard it. A faint voice, barely more than a whisper, carried on the wind. "See you soon. I don't know what's going on with pump number 3, but I'm starting to think it's not just serving gas." I couldn't sleep after what happened with pump number 3. The silver dollar sat on my nightstand, taunting me under the pale glow of my bedside lamp. I tried to tell myself it was just a prank or some strange collector passing through, but the voice I heard, "See you soon," clung to my mind like the scent of gasoline on my clothes. The next night, I showed up to work more on edge than usual. The hum of the fluorescent lights seemed louder, and every shadow outside the windows felt like it was watching me. Around 1 a.m., just as I started to convince myself I was imagining things, the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut through the silence. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward the window, and there it was, the same black Buick, idling at pump number 3. This time I wasn't going to let it slip away. Grabbing the flashlight from behind the counter, I stepped outside, the chill in the air sharper than the night before. The car gleamed under the harsh station lights, its polished surface reflecting the world like a black mirror. The headlights burned bright, but the interior was dark, an abyss behind the windshield. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaking. No response. I approached cautiously, the flashlight beam trembling as I aimed it at the driver's seat. At first I thought it was empty again, but then I saw him. A figure sat slumped behind the wheel, head tilted down, a wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. His hands gripped the steering wheel, fingers unnaturally long and thin, like they'd been stretched. "Sir?" I tried again, stepping closer. The flashlight's beam flickered, and for a split second, his face was illuminated. My stomach turned. His skin was pale and sunken, lips pulled back into a grimace that exposed yellowed teeth. His eyes were closed, but they twitched beneath the lids, as if he were dreaming, and then I saw the blood. The smell hit me before I noticed it, coppery and sour, mixing with the faint stench of rot. I moved the flashlight lower toward the passenger seat, and nearly dropped it when I saw what was there. Bundles of blankets, stained dark and wet, sat piled on the seat. At first I thought they were just soaked rags, but then I noticed the small, limp shapes beneath them. Tiny hands, tiny feet. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. The car door creaked open, and the smell hit me like a wave. My flashlight flickered again, and for the first time, I noticed the back seat. More blankets, more stains, more shapes. The air grew heavy, thick with an unnatural chill. That's when I heard it, a faint chuckle, low and guttural, coming from the driver. "You found my passengers," he rasped, his voice gravelly and broken like dry leaves crunching underfoot. I stumbled backward, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I tried to keep it on him. His head lifted slowly and his eyes opened. They weren't eyes at all, just empty sockets, blacker than the night around us. What are you?" I managed to choke out. He tilted his head, the grimace on his face stretching into something resembling a smile. "They called me the baby butcher in the papers, but you can call me Earl." My blood ran cold. Earl Marsh. The name hit me like a freight train. He'd been all over the news just a few weeks ago, a long-dead serial killer whose body had been discovered in the crawl space of an abandoned farmhouse. "But you're dead," I stammered, my voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "Dead?" he echoed, his voice dripping with mockery. "Maybe, but this road, this pump, it brought me back, and now I'm looking for new passengers." The engine roared to life, louder than any car I'd ever heard, drowning out the sound of my panicked breaths. The headlights flared, blinding me, and when I opened my eyes again, the Buick was gone. All that remained was a trail of fresh tire marks leading away from pump number 3, and the faint sound of a baby crying in the distance. The rest of my shift after Earl Marsh's visit was a blur. Every sound, the buzzing fluorescent lights, the creak of the storage room door, felt amplified, like the entire station was alive and watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the air around pump number 3 was different. Heavy, dark. I sat behind the counter, replaying the encounter in my head. The car, the driver, the blood-soaked blankets. I wanted to believe it was a bad dream or some sick prank, but the silver dollar in my pocket said otherwise. Its edges dug into my palm, cold and solid. Too real to ignore. By the time my shift ended, I was determined to find answers. The first thing I did when I got home was fire up my laptop. I started with a search for Earl Marsh, the baby butcher. Most of the articles matched what I already knew. A mechanic turned serial killer who preyed on families traveling along lonely stretches of highway. But there was one detail I hadn't noticed before. He'd been executed in 1953, yet the car he was driving, a black 1947 Buick, Looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line. I couldn't stop thinking about that car. It wasn't just pristine, it felt wrong, like it didn't belong in this world anymore. I widened my search to include the gas station itself. It had been around for decades, a relic of the 1940s when this highway was bustling with travelers. But as the years passed, businesses along the road shut down and the area fell into disrepair. Still, I found stories, old forum posts, local legends, about strange happenings at the station. One post caught my attention. A trucker claimed he saw a car at pump number 3 with no driver. He described headlights that flickered like fireflies and an engine that roared even though no one touched the gas. Another story mentioned voices whispering from the pumps, warning drivers not to stop, and then I found an old newspaper clipping buried deep in an archive. The headline read, "Gruesome Murders Along Route 16, Families Found Dead, Cars Abandoned." The article was dated 1952, the year before Earl Marsh's execution. It described a series of murders eerily similar to the ones attributed to him, families traveling at night, their cars left at the side of the road. The reporter speculated that Marsh might have been responsible for more deaths than originally thought. But what really chilled me was a detail buried at the end of the article. Witnesses reported seeing Marsh's car parked at a gas station on Route 16 the night before his capture. The gas station. I leaned back in my chair, heart racing. Was it possible that pump number 3 was more than just a piece of outdated equipment? Could it be connected to Marsh and others like him? My thoughts were interrupted by a buzz from my phone. A news alert popped up on the screen. Serial killer Donnie Keller dead at 71. I didn't recognize the name at first, but as I read, the details started to click. Keller had been a notorious murderer in the 1980s, known for abducting young women from roadside diners. His calling card? A bright red 1980 Chevrolet Corvette, which he used to lure victims before disposing of them along deserted highways. The article said Keller had died the night before in a prison infirmary, a heart attack. But what stuck with me wasn't his death. It was the car. I couldn't shake the feeling that Keller's Corvette might be connected to whatever was happening at pump number 3. The pattern was too strong to ignore. A killer, a car, a gas station. That night, I showed up to work with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. Every creak of the station seemed louder, every shadow longer. I couldn't stop glancing out the window toward pump number 3, half expecting to see the Buick again. The hours crawled by. Midnight came and went without incident. By 2:30 a.m., I had almost convinced myself I was being paranoid. And then I heard it. The crunch of tires on gravel. My stomach dropped as I turned toward the window. A car was pulling into the lot, its headlights cutting through the darkness. I held my breath, watching as it rolled up to pump number 3 and came to a stop. At first, the glare of the headlights made it hard to see. The car's outline shimmered under the fluorescent lights like it wasn't fully there. Slowly the headlights dimmed and the car came into focus. It was sleek, low to the ground, and painted a deep, glossy red. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized the shape. I was shocked to see a 1980 Chevrolet Corvette pull up to pump number 3.